Good evening and welcome to Freedom is a Constant Struggle with your host Kilu Nyasha and board-opping Dina Boyer. And yesterday was the 7th anniversary of 9/11, commemorating the nearly 3,000 deaths in terror attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, and the 37th anniversary of the military coup in Chile, backed by Nixon and Kissinger, that assassinated the duly elected socialist president Salvador Allende and installed the brutal regime of General Augusto Pinochet. In addition, from September 9th to 13th in 1971, prisoners at New York's Attica State Prison took over the prison yard, holding guards as hostages to demand better treatment. Tonight's guest, attorney Dennis Cunningham, the people's lawyer, was the first lawyer to go to Attica Prison in the wake of the massacre of prisons and guards on orders from New York Governor Nelson Rockefeller on September 13th, 1971. When it ended, 39 were dead, hundreds wounded, and more than 1,000 tortured. Dennis stayed until the whole case was finished nearly 30 years later. Beginning in 1968, Chicago, Dennis started the People's Law Office, that he refers to as the PLO, that defended the Weathermen, the Black Panthers, Young Lords, Rise Up Angry, SDS, and the Young Patriots. Later, in San Francisco, Dennis defended and won victory in the Judi, Bari, and Pepper Spray 8 cases, among many others involving police and FBI misconduct. He is currently assisting in the SF8 case. It is my great honor and pleasure now to welcome to Freedom Dennis Cunningham. Thank you for joining us, Dennis. It's always a pleasure to have you.
I love coming on this show.
All right.
It's good. But I got to say, I wasn't the first lawyer that went into Attica.
Oh.
It was, some of my partners were, and there were a lot of lawyers that were involved in that. And I was there early, but it was a few weeks afterwards before I first got there. Then I made up for it by staying a long time.
You sure did. And Liz Fink, I believe, was the other lawyer who stuck with it a very long time.
She was in law school when it happened, and then she came along in, I think, 72 or 73 and started to help and stayed even more at the heart of the civil case that went on for so many years, yes.
Well, let's back up a little bit, Dennis, and just talk first about what the prisoners at Attica, New York State Prison were angry about, what they were, some of their demands were, and also talk a little bit about the influence of the assassination a month earlier of George Jackson.
Well, you know, as far as the grievances, you name it, there was a problem in that prison in particular, the New York prisons in general, and prisons all over the country at the time. Not that they don't still exist, those problems, but then there was a lot of activism in the prison,
right.
And there was a big response to the murder of George Jackson. They had, in particular, just a few days before the uprising, they had a demonstration which took the form of nobody eating and nobody talking in the mess hall. And there were these hundreds of prisoners, you know, in a situation which normally 3 times a day is just chaos and noise and, you know, all kind of movement and activity and whatnot. And instead they all just came in and sat down and
complete silence.
Yes, and it really spooked
it must have freaked out the guards in the administration.
It really did, but not in a way that would cause them to say, well, gee, you know, let's talk. You know?
Of course not.
I mean, the underlying problem at Attica then was the fact that all of the staff, 100% of the guards and civilian workers in the prison were white.
And an overwhelming majority of prisoners were black and brown.
Were black and brown. Yes, I can't remember the numbers, but it was definitely a majority. And most of them came from the city. They came from New York and around New York. Quite a number from Buffalo and the black communities in other parts of the state, but numerically, there was a huge number from New York City, and that's 400 miles away, so they're not getting visits, and they're not, the communication is hard. And the racism on the part of the staff was overt and constant and, nasty and not submerged the way it later became.
Right, exactly.
And so it was, it was like just flashpoints all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And the way it started was was kind of spontaneous,
mm-hmm.
And then a little while later, like within a half hour or so, there was a gate that broke. That was the lock on the gate was fixed with bars that when they would turn the crank, the bars would go down into the floor and up into the ceiling mm-hmm. to hold the gate in place.
Right.
And there had been something wrong with one of the gates, and they had butt welded the shaft at the bottom of the gate to the rest of it. And when some guys were shaking on the gate, and it broke, and the gate came open.
Oh.
And if that hadn't happened, everything would have been different. But they got into the central area of the 4 blocks of the prison where all the quarters and the gates, there was controls in there, so they could open everything up. Oh. And so then everybody could go everywhere. And so then, and there were, because of the tenor of the times, I think, and because of the circumstances, the racial and political circumstances, there was a lot of organization in the prison that pre-existed, and there was a certain amount of preparation, there were, in the sense of people were thinking, wow, if we could ever get a chance to do something, we ought to do this or we ought to do that. And so people, it wasn't totally aimless.
Right.
And that's what led to the taking of hostages, and everybody went into one of the yards. The prison is a big square area with cell blocks on the outside, and then these tunnels in the middle, so that it broke it down into 4 yards.
Mm-hmm.
And they all went to one of the yards,
right? And
they brought the hostages all there, and there was,
they took about 10 or 11 hostages.
Oh no, there was about 40.
Oh,
there was 40 or.
I'm thinking of the hostages that died.
There were 10 that died.
That died, right?
9 that died in
Absolutely.
The assault.
Right.
But there was a lot of intelligence and unity and purposefulness in what they did. So they got the hostages all together in one place. They put guards around them so they'd be safe. They got a group together to be the representative committee. They started talking to the police, through they were at 2 ends of the corridor, and they could tell them stuff. There was I can't remember if it was more than one, but there was at least one guard who was seriously hurt, and they worked it out to get him to the gate so he could be taken out to the hospital.
Right.
And
I understand that they treated the prisoners well, the guards.
Well, once the rebellion had happened and the prisoners were in charge of the yard, they took very good care of the hostages.
Right.
The relations with the staff people that were still on the outside were dicey. There was a lot of hostility, but the commissioner, who was
Oswald,
a somewhat enlightened man, he came to Attica. He came to and he went inside the prison, and a lot of people were telling him not to, but he did, and he started talking. They started negotiating, and one of the things the prisoners did right away was to call for these outside observers.
Right, exactly.
They made a long list of people. They wanted them all brought there so that they could serve as
was one of them.
was one.
Bobby Seale, I believe.
Bobby Seale finally got there.
I think they.
Tom Wicker was a
Tom
big
Wicker, who
person
wrote
on
the
it.
book
And they
Time
asked,
to Die.
Yes, all about it.
About it.
Mm-hmm. And they wanted
He
Bill
was a
Kunstler
New
for
York
their
Times
lawyer.
correspondent at the time.
Wicker, yes.
Right.
They wanted Bill Kunstler for their lawyer, the prisoners.
Oh my goodness.
And he got right up there.
All right.
And he started, meeting with them, trying to represent them, trying to deal with the state, trying to deal with all the observers. The Observers Committee, by the end, was 40 or 50 people. Right. And there were a lot of state politicians finally that got in on it, and not all of them progressive by any means. But they had this, and they set up stuff so they could bring them food.
Because we're talking 4 days here.
Right.
I'm
still probably in the first and second day, I got to hurry up. I know we only got so much
take a minute right now here, too, and open our live line. So if our viewers want to ask a question of Dennis Cunningham, our number is 621, that's 415-621-4473.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Dennis.
Call ahead.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to say the thing worked out in a certain way for a while. And the observers they didn't want the observers to mediate, just to be there, and right. Just and kind of to watch over it. They wanted the governor to come. They had a lot of demands about the conditions, about the pork in the meals, about the doctors. There was terrible stories about the doctors that mistreated them and wouldn't take care of them, and just ghastly stuff. But there was sanitation stuff, there was school stuff, there were very practical demands. And in fact, Oswald, the commissioner, in the first stage of the negotiations, he said these are reasonable.
I think they
we'll
also
do
wanted bilingual education as well. Because there was a huge Puerto Rican population in the
very
East.
large,
yeah.
and very large in Attica, and there were a lot of Puerto Ricans in the committee.
Right.
And it was reasonable the way the thing went forward in the beginning. And they had the hostages talk on television. They talked to the news people.
I saw it on the news. I remember.
But the thing that happened was that then Oswald started double talking. And he said one thing when he was inside at the table with everybody and when everybody could hear, but then he went outside and he said some different things to the reporters, and it got on television. They're sitting in there with the television. They saw it right there.
Oh, right.
So, I mean, as smart as he was really foolish, to do something like that. And then the other thing that happened was that there had been one guard.
The prisoners must have felt betrayed by him.
Oh, yeah. Well, they say, how can we trust you if you tell us this and then you go say that?
Right.
And he didn't really have too much of an answer,
right.
And they kind of, they smoothed it out for a while. And but at a certain point, I don't know whether it was his decision or Rockefeller's decision, they stopped negotiating. And they told them, they had got it down. They had more or less agreed to a lot of these, particular things about reform. They had it down to whether there would be amnesty for the day of the uprising, because
and I think they wanted to be transported to another country.
There was that was the point 2, yes, that prisoners who wanted to would be removed from the prison and taken to a non-imperialist country.
Right.
That was a negotiating point.
Right.
There were 3 points in the end. There were like 28 points the first day, and there was a lot where those were agreed to, but then it shifted. And there were 3 points. One, that there would be no reprise, or there would be amnesty.
Right.
The second, that prisoners who wanted to be taken to a non-imperialist country could go. And the third was that they would remove the warden, because the warden was a creep. And he was really nasty, and he was really racist, and he was really I know because on the first day I went there, I met him, and he could barely contain himself just talking to me when I'm asking him about stuff the prisoners had raised with me. And he was like apoplectic, you know. He was so upset with everything that had happened and with the fact that his authority had been breached, you know,
Right.
and that his regime had, you know, experienced this incredible uprising. The world knew about it, and all this stuff had happened, and then there'd been the massacre. So by the time I
let's
saw him,
fast forward a little bit to
fast forward, they
September
broke
13th.
off on the 13th. They broke off the negotiations on that Saturday, and on Sunday they were going to come in. It seemed like, and Badillo and Wicker and some of them, Senator Dunn, got a hold of Rockefeller and said, you know, you should come here. You shouldn't have let them attack. And he said, look, we're going to do what we're going to do. I can't come there. And they said, well, if they're going to attack, don't have them attack on Sunday afternoon when everybody's watching football and it all comes on television, because we'll have riots in the streets, you know. So I guess they took that as a good idea, and they waited. Then it poured rain on Sunday night, Monday morning, and they're all out in this yard, and they came, and they just came in. First they had Army helicopter. They gassed them with, you know, military gas, which they were told is going to put them on the ground. Those are the words that were used. Like, you breathe this gas, you're going to collapse. You're going to be gasping for breath, and indeed they were, laying in the mud, gasping for breath, and nobody resisted, and they just came in on these catwalks, these roofs of the tunnels, and started shooting. I mean, and so they're shooting into this yard where all these guys are laying on the ground, and they shot for 6 minutes. There was, I forget, you know, they had some count of how many shots were
assault
fired.
rifles,
long rifles, not AK-47s, but
deadly.
These sniper rifles and shotguns and whatever. I mean, because the other part of it was that Rockefeller said no guards should take place; it'd all be done by the state police. But of course, the guards went too, and they had this shooting fish in a barrel for 6 minutes.
And people were running, and they were shot in the back.
People were shot in the back. People got up and tried to, you know, certain people were clearly picked out and killed, and then they.
Who were some of the leaders who were killed that day?
Well, the one who was killed that was the standout was this kid, L.D. Barkley. He was 23 years old, and he had been a spokesperson. Yeah. He had been on television. We are men, not beasts. We refuse to be beaten and driven as if we were beasts. You know, what
and there was a white
here.
guy there who was very popular, and I can't remember.
Somebody you're thinking of is Sam Melville.
Yes,
the
Sam
bomber.
Melville.
Yes, right. He was murdered. His buddy was with him, and they stood up and raised their hands. The guy was up on the wall, and he just shot him. You know,
right.
And that was.
Yeah, Sam Melville had done some writing, I believe.
Oh, he did some. He did. He wrote letters to his son. They published a book.
Oh, okay.
Letters from Attica.
Right. My memory is a little
whole bunch of books
on that. Yeah, but I remember.
Beautiful book.
I remember we did a publication, By Any Means Necessary, and we exposed a lot of we exposed the whole thing, and we focused on some of the leaders of the uprising.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, there were leaders who survived, and then were leaders of the defense. You know, because there were like 60 brothers were indicted, and those cases went on.
Okay, we only have a couple of minutes, so we got to sum up what happened with the. Talk a little bit about Big Black and the litigation and. Well, we started
a civil suit against, you know, the chiefs of the state forces, the state police, the warden, the governor, commissioner, the governor.
Rockefeller.
He was excused from the case, but the others, we had trials in the 90s, right, when it was 20 years old. We started the trial on the 20th anniversary, almost exactly, and had a hung jury, Then we had, but they found liability against one assistant warden because he'd both been in the meetings and then he'd gone in the yard when they were beating everybody. Because they stripped him naked afterwards and had him stand in this long line, those pictures, and Black was laid on the table. They put a football under his chin. They said if he dropped the football, we're going to kill you. They burned him with cigarettes. They dropped hot shells on him. And he was there for everybody else to see while they were waiting to go through this gauntlet and be beat up with axe handles and rifle butts and stuff, to go back into the cell block after it was over.
I remember they even showed pictures of them all nude.
They were all naked, right? You know, in a long snake line, waiting to go inside one by one and go through this gauntlet that they had in one of the tunnels.
Right. So,
you know, I mean, so we had a civil suit, and in the end, we won some trials. Black won $4 million in damages. The United States Court of Appeals took it all away. And they said...
no, they didn't.
They did too. They said, you can't. We had 3 verdicts. They took them all. And they said, you can't have a class action. We had a class action for 25 years. And they said, no, that won't do. You have to start over and let everybody bring his own case. 30 years later, that was the ruling.
So many of them are gone now, like Big Black passed away.
Many. There's only a few left that we know of. And we got a little settlement in the end, and a few people got some money, and lawyers got a little money, and it was
nowhere near
over.
worth 30. Anyway, we're clean out of time. Dennis, thank you so much again.
It's a long subject. That's a short talk.
Yes, I know, but thank you very, very much for joining us again.
Thank you for having this program on this anniversary. It should never be forgotten.
It shouldn't. Remember Attica.
There you go.
And I want to thank Dina Boyer for board opping. I want to thank you for watching, and I want you to please tune in next week. We're going to have Pierre Laboursier back, who will talk about the catastrophe in Haiti. Power to the people. I'm Kilu Nyasha.